Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Digital Law News. This is brought to you by Digital Law and produced by Anson Evaluate. So just give you a little introduction into who Digital Law are. It is a law firm in the UK which is specialised in anything to do with digital, so things to do with cybersecurity, data protection, and all things along those lines. So I'm Laura Spencer, and I'm joined today by my colleague Peter Wright. So I'll just pass over to Peter to introduce himself.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, my name's Peter. I'm the Managing Director of Digital Law, and we are bringing this series of discussions to you to give you a feeling for the sort of conversations that we have in the office each week when we're staying up to date with regards to developments in this very fast-moving field. So hence we wanted to sort of give you a flavour of the sort of things that we see in the news, and that includes both the national press and some of the specialist press as well. So hence we've got a selection of stories to discuss with you today.
Great. So let's get started because we've got quite a few to go through today. So the first one is very controversial at the minute. So someone is from Sky News and is regarding TikTok. So in last week's session, we talked about how India had now banned TikTok along with, I think it was about 50 other apps as well from the Chinese market. So now over the weekend, Trump announced that he wanted to ban the TikTok app. However, now people have realised that he does not have the power to do so. And a TikTok spokesperson has actually said that they are here for the long run and do not intend to stop operating in the US. And they're actually in talks at the minute about hosting their European HQ in London.
Indeed, this is quite a fast-moving story. So indeed, the tweets from President Trump was on Friday evening where he threatened to ban TikTok. The issue with that, of course, is that it's a major undertaking to even think about banning what has been the most successful app downloaded in the US in the last 12 months with tens of millions of downloads, principally by a younger generation, so teenagers and people in their 20s, who have very much embraced the way that this app allows for the sharing of content. And let's face it, most of the people in President Trump's generation don't really understand it and aren't really on it. And it's as part of the general, I think, opposition within the US presidential administration to a lot of things with regards to the Chinese state at the moment. So hence their position with regards to Huawei, and hence their position with regards to trade with China as a whole. They're kind of lumping in the idea that because TikTok is a Chinese app and that there is the possibility in their eyes that TikTok might share the personal data of users with the Chinese state. They are raising the spectre of possibly banning it. It has already been banned in India, which was a massive market for TikTok. But at the moment, there were some concerns that the UK and the EU might follow suit. But the fact that over the weekend it surfaced again that TikTok might have its EU base located in London, and the Department of International Trade is continuing to talk to TikTok about the conditions that they can provide in order for TikTok to choose London as their European base, means that while the UK government has said it is taking Huawei out of the UK's 5G network, for example, largely because of the impact of sanctions by the United States on Huawei, which mean that the US chips that were being relied on for that service are no longer being provided, and has therefore meant that the UK National Cybersecurity Centre has changed the status of Huawei and highlighted a continued risk with their involvement in the UK 5G network. There is, of course, no justification along the same lines for turning around and banning TikTok. So at the moment, it is being seen as a clear example of the fact that while Huawei has been banned from the UK 5G network, that does not mean that all Chinese businesses and all Chinese business interests are therefore persona non grata in the UK and Europe. Hence why at the moment they are saying they will continue to go ahead with embracing TikTok, which has been similarly a large successful app that's been downloaded millions of times by users in the UK and Europe as well. I think the other thing we probably need to just flag up as well is that because of these threats from President Trump, the US arm of TikTok is now in negotiations with Microsoft for Microsoft to purchase the TikTok app in the US only. That is quite key as well when we think that Microsoft already owns Skype and they own LinkedIn, as well as, of course, providing all of their cloud services. So it's another example of a large US tech corporation actually increasing its holding in different aspects of the telecoms and online market.
Yeah, and like you said about the maybe the European market, European HQ being in London, they've got a great job it will bring a lot of jobs into the UK as well.
Indeed, and at this time where jobs
Sorry,
are, of
can
course,
you hear me?
I can now, yes, it was just breaking up a little bit there. So, of course, yeah, the fact that jobs are in such short supply at the moment means that if it is possible to land a couple of thousand well-paid, highly skilled jobs in London, then the government's going to end up jumping at that opportunity if it possibly can.
Yeah, definitely. So moving on to the next story. So this is one that was in the Law Society Gazette at the end of last week. And this is about a solicitor who admits an innocent mistake of emailing herself client data. So a senior solicitor that worked at the law firm has been alleged to have downloaded precedents and templates from the firm's servers and sent them to her personal Hotmail address ahead of her starting her notice period from her employer. So these precedents and templates actually contained confidential data, including names and addresses. However, she has admitted to doing this, but there was a bit of a confusion over what documents she thought she was sending. So she said she uploaded some documents from her personal drive onto the firm server and then sent them over to her personal email address without her actually knowing there was actually some client data in there.
Indeed, I think this is a really interesting case, and if my understanding of it is correct, Laura, I think that the individual involved, the solicitor, felt that those precedents, because they were from her own drive, therefore felt that, well, hang on, these are mine, and she was therefore just taking back what she'd originally provided to the firm in the first place. Yeah. The snafu, as it were, is that she had originally provided bare templates that merely contained her intellectual property, as in how she had set out these letters, paragraphs, the text, etc. But then the versions that she downloaded were populated with client information, and that's where the problem then arises.
Yeah, I think that is an issue as well. Like, a lot of people just think, right, let's take this client file home and put it in the boot of my car. I'll work on that at home, and they might forget that it's there, or they might use a bag that's in and it might get lost that way or something. But the same is with obviously digital. You've got a business email for a reason. Use the business email.
Yes. And that's just it. It's where people are then using their sort of private email, Gmails and Hotmails, which are simply not suitable for this sort of content to be shared on. So it would be a data protection issue in any way, shape or form. It's then the fact that this is a solicitor sharing client confidential information onto that private account, that private network. And hence, this is a great example, really, of the fact that many years ago we used to turn around and we'd end up not being encouraged to take back hard copy files. And in the same way, we need to be very careful if we are emailing files out, thinking, oh yes, we'll work on these when we get home. So I think it's a bit of a parable for where we are now with lockdown and remote working, where many firms have instigated work from home schemes at speed because we had to, and might not have thought about the sorts of risks that are highlighted by this case. So it's a very timely reminder. Yeah,
definitely. I completely agree. So moving on to the next story. So this is quite an interesting one. So Coachella have actually threatened a charity in the UK over the name of a festival that they was going to put together. So obviously the Coachella Festival is a well-known festival in the US which attracts a lot of big celebrities to that festival and that. So the MS Trust which is based in the UK, actually set up a online festival entitled Coachella, and the charity has actually been forced to back down from this, despite that thinking that people were unlikely to make a mistake and mistake this as the US event, which instead of its own, as obviously they're going to be having a lot less glamorous acts.
Indeed, and I think in their they've also said that by changing the name now away from Coachella, there'll be less soft furnishings involved in the than they originally thought of with the idea of doing a home festival. I think this is a good example, unfortunately, of where you can end up using a little bit of creative license when it comes to branding and putting together events on a fairly small scale, and then falling foul of a large corporation that has a bit of a sense of humour failure with regards to the perceived use of their name, branding, or intellectual property, which is what's happened here. And the trust have said, that they could have decided to fight this, but then thought, what's the point of using charitable funds that have been donated to us to try and take on this large corporation when that's not really what that money's been donated for. So they've just decided, well, okay, we'll rebrand it and move away. But it kind of shows that where there is this inequality of arms, where you get a large corporation determined to say, no, you cannot go ahead and do this. And a bit like the way that Hugo Boss, unfortunately, have fallen foul of this, where they've ended up trying to say that organisations can't use the word boss. So even a brewery, I think a little microbrewery, is producing a sort of Boss beer, and they were told, no, you can't do that because we are Hugo Boss. And there was a big exchange of legal letters and threats of proceedings, and they eventually said, okay, fine, you win, we won't go ahead with that name. But it kind of illustrates the point that sometimes you can fall foul and find yourself receiving quite heavy enforcement on these issues. I think it's important as well. We, funnily enough, had an inquiry from one potential new client last week that had come up with a fashion brand, and the name of that brand, when we looked and did a quick search online, there was a website already for a clothing brand with a very, very similar name that we said, look, there's going to be the inherent potential there for confusion. The client was worried about saying, oh, well, what about, could I be on the end of, proceedings with regards to IP? And I said, well, that's one possibility. They may start sending aggressive letters, but also think of the impact on your business. If there is any ambiguity and someone who thinks that they're actually buying a product from you ends up buying that product from this other site with a very, very similar potential name, virtually identical domain name, selling the same services. So it's something to be very, very careful at a time when you might be setting up a new brand, a new company. This sort of highlights some of the risks, and I always think it's best, if possible, to strike out and find a brand and an identity that's totally unique and different, so that you don't fall across these sorts of possibilities that can come up when it comes to that sort of branding.
Yeah, definitely. And as you mentioned, it is a lot to do with the big business, small business. It's always the big business that ends, as it seems.
Yes, yeah. There are plenty of examples about it, and to a certain extent, if it actually went before a court, the big business might not win. It's just the point is that if you do go all the way to court and you lose, you'll end up paying rather a lot of money, and even if you win, you may end up paying rather a lot of money just in legal fees. So it's a rather unfair way that the system is currently structured, but it is leaving at the moment the path available for larger organisations to sort of bully others out of the marketplace as a result.
Yeah. So moving on to our next one. So this is about a recent decision. So digital will signing ought to outlive the pandemic. So it's been confirmed in the last week or so that wills witnessed via video link will now be legally valid in a move that is welcome and fundamental and overdue. So as most people know, there used to have to be two people who, well, it still does, but obviously in person, they're physically present when a testator is signing the will. So in places like Scotland, they've already been doing this for a little while now. now you can actually sign the will virtually with two people virtually present from I think it is from September, this is going to come into force. So a lot of people are saying that this should outlive the pandemic and they should stay forever.
Indeed, it's a reform that's probably been a very long time coming. It's always been the case that a will has to be witnessed by two testators who are not beneficiaries under that will. So classically, when, for example, a will will be signed at a law firm, just two other members of staff might be called through just to witness the will because they will be independent witnesses. It's also quite common that medical staff in hospitals end up being asked, "Oh, can you witness this will?" for example. Then that process gets blown out of the water by the current COVID pandemic, where it is difficult to get two independent people to be able to stand nearby to look at the will and witness it and sign it without being very concerned about then breaking issues of social distancing. And of course, if we are talking about an elderly, vulnerable person who's making their will, no one wants to put them at risk by them then having to be in very close contact with the two witnesses. So hence this principle of being able to do it via Zoom, being able to do it via video conference instead, which interestingly has been the case already in Scotland and is now being confirmed as being incorporated into the law in England and Wales as well.
Yeah, I think it's a much needed move forward. Like a lot of things can be done over video conferencing at the moment, so why not this?
Indeed.
Yeah. So moving on to our next story. So this one and the following story, I think, are both about ransomware attacks. So it said that over the last year, over £200 million has been paid to cyber criminals by British companies. So many of these extortionists are based in Russia and Eastern Europe and are targeting well-known businesses with malicious software and charging them tens of thousands of pounds in order to regain access to the networks. And experts are now saying that companies are so fearful of public embarrassment, loss of data and fines from regulators for data breaches that they are showing more willingness to pay for the ransom.
Which is leading to these situations sometimes where some companies have then been hit multiple times, because then, of course, the ransomware hackers have worked out, they've paid once, maybe they'll pay again. And of course, if their defences were breached once and someone inadvertently allowed the ransomware attackers to gain access, for example, through a phishing email, then once they're in, they can very often get back in and cause havoc many times over. So it's been the case that some institutions and organisations have been hit more than one time and end up paying these very large ransoms as a result.
Yeah, definitely. I think the next story is about roughly the same. Yeah, so this is about roughly the same thing. So the National Trust have recently been targeted by cyber hacker and have had to pay off some ransom. And I think we was talking about Garmin last week or the week before. So a lot of companies are now paying these ransoms off rather than getting the data back from the backups.
Yes, I think sometimes a full-scale rebuild of systems from backups, some ransomware will end up rendering quite sophisticated IT into just lumps of black plastic and carbon fibre that, on the face of it, then takes an awful lot of effort to get back up and running. And sometimes the decision is taken, we'll pay the ransom rather than engage in a full-scale rebuild here. But the risk for an organisation like the National Trust, an organisation that is based on its member data, and don't forget as well that every time when you go to a National Trust property, all of those nice people who are running the gift shop or giving tours of the building or telling you about the unique history of a particular room or a particular piece of artwork, they are volunteers more often than not. and therefore it's an organisation that relies on the goodwill of those volunteers, and where that sort of information is potentially being breached. So, it would be terrible if the details of those volunteers in terms of names, email addresses or home addresses were then breached, because then it's an indicator to say that this person is a National Trust volunteer, and you can have a shot at burgling their property because they'll be out volunteering at the weekend. So this is still incredibly sensitive information that you would want to make sure is very secure and under lock and key, and it's a real concern for those volunteers that it has been breached, not to mention the fact that then, rather than put in greater security measures, that instead a ransom ended up being paid. You'd hope that as part of the follow-up process, lessons will be learned. But with a large organisation like this, there will be concerns with regards to legacy systems, with regards to compatibility with fundraising, volunteering, membership. And you can see that it will be very, very difficult to implement high levels of security across their IT estate. So it just flags up the fact that organisations large and small have to be very mindful of the risk from ransomware in particular, and that indeed it is reputationally very, very difficult, but that sometimes that still isn't a reason to just pay the ransom. At the end of the day, we don't really want the criminals to keep on doing this. We want them hopefully to decide one day that ransomware isn't worth it. But until then, if we keep paying the ransom, then it will only become a worse problem.
Yeah, definitely. So just going back to the story previous to this, so this is to do with the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which actually started yesterday in the UK. So there is a data company called Magneta, and they have said that the scheme prompts GDPR fears. So they've warned that hospitality venues need to ensure that their track and trace systems are now watertight before the scheme actually starts. So the food and drink industry are now under a renewed focus, trying to get loads of people in using this discount, as they will be claiming the money back from the government. So they're not losing out on anything. So this is good for businesses getting people back in. But due to the large amount of people coming back, they might actually see a struggle in terms of dealing with GDPR requirements now when they are doing their track and trace, as they are having to take so much information from their customers.
Indeed, and we produced a webinar a couple of weeks back looking at the fact that since pubs and the hospitality industry opened on the 4th of July, they've been collecting user data of all of their patrons so that they can assist the government with the pandemic test and trace scheme. Yeah. And of course, now under the Eat Out to Help Out, then we're not just potentially collecting all of that personal data of the fact they've visited. We're then collecting information about what they've eaten and what they've paid in terms of what, payment details for what they've eaten and when. And there's a variety of issues associated with this. One is that this is now very sensitive personal data. What you eat can be an indicator of anything from medical or health-related issues, dietary issues, all the way through to religious beliefs. So what if you've then got a list of this is what someone's personal details in terms of where they've eaten, what they've eaten and how much they paid for it. We're talking about very sensitive data that's being collected. And because this is a system that's been implemented at speed to allow businesses to offer this promotion during August, it isn't necessarily the case that all of this data is going to be collected and kept securely. And that is going to therefore be an ongoing concern that they are wide open and susceptible to potentially being compromised. I mean, okay, it is a concern that GDPR might not be being complied with, but I think the bigger risk is that hackers are able to then access this data, which is then terrible for the business, terrible for the data subjects involved, and terrible for confidence as a whole. But I think you've probably seen this as well, Laura, even just within the last 24 hours, there are a lot of people availing themselves of this offer. I've seen queues outside restaurants and bars of people trying to get in. I've seen similar queues again today in and around town, and I think there is a real appetite, in a very real sense, amongst the public to be able to go out and enjoy themselves for the first time in 6 months. But then in the background, there's this issue with regards to collection of data, and then also the public health issue with regards to the fact that with everyone going out, we're hoping that it isn't the case, that then they're going to end up spreading COVID. And we have a government testing station outside in our car park, which I'm looking across at now. And that's been full of cars throughout today as they take tests. And it's just a terrible thing in the background that at the same time as we're trying to get people out to save the economy and to spend money, are we then at risk of another spike, let alone at risk of more data protection breaches?
Yeah, definitely. I think it is all about like balancing the risks, isn't it? Because they want to get as much of the economy back to normal as possible, but then you've got all these other risks that are obviously coming with it as well.
Yeah.
So moving on to our next story. So this one is quite a different one that we wouldn't usually like cover on, but it does highlight some of like the cyber risks and to do with people who are clearly taking advantage of people online, really. So a woman actually bought a puppy over the web, and this was during the whole situation that's going on at the minute. So she found the breeder through the site Pets for Homes, which is quite a common site for people to find like dog breeders through. And due to like reasons at the minute, they usually send more pictures and do video calls when they're arranging to pick up puppies and things like that. And this actual breeder refused to send pictures and agreed to a video call due to safety reasons. Yeah, 6 days after receiving the puppy was found dead, and they actually spent £7,000 trying to make the puppy better before it died. And it was actually found that it had caught a contagious disease, which actually killed it. So I think this just reminds us how risky it is purchasing things online, especially if you're not going to see it in person and you don't actually know what you get yourself into, really.
Indeed, and I suppose we should declare an interest for the listeners and viewers, Laura. As you know, as a dog owner, you're someone who knows the market that's out there. And when we were discussing this story, you were saying about the fact that sales of puppies as pets has actually increased during the lockdown.
Yeah, definitely. I know I was speaking with my cousin about this other day because he's into dog breeding and things like that. And at the start of lockdown, I bought my dog a couple of months ago, and I think I paid about £700 for my dog. And roughly when I bought my dog, the dogs were roughly around the same price. But after lockdown, at the start of lockdown, compared to, say, the middle of lockdown, the prices were tripling. And the dogs, it was clear that demand was going up and supply wasn't the same as well, with like the breeding and things like that, because you couldn't go to people's houses to breed the dogs and things like that. So it's clear that people are taking advantage of people already. And I've heard stories about people buying puppies at the start of lockdown really cheap and then selling them later on at a higher price.
So I think that the motto is, as with anything, when you're buying it online, it's incredibly important to make sure that you can trust the vendor that you're speaking to, particularly if they might not have been known to you until you actually started searching for puppies and searching for the breeds and what the pet that you're wanting to purchase. And it's not just a matter then of, there's 2 or 3 recommendations on here, they must be fine. I'd say you'd want, if possible, to get recommendations from someone else who you know and trust, who has previously purchased from a vendor, to know that they can be trusted, and certainly be very, very careful before then making a money transfer, because who knows, you might not even get a puppy full stop, or you might get a puppy that unscrupulously cheaply imported into the country that doesn't comply with the necessary safety standards, that might already be ill, and then the possibility of finding yourself in the same position as the lady in the story.
Yeah, definitely. I think this applies to a lot of things though as well. Obviously, all the industry is changing at the moment. A lot of people are buying cars online and getting them to deliver cars. the same applies really. You just need to make sure you're doing your checks before you actually send over your money and agree to buy something.
Exactly. If something looks too good to be true, more often than not, it is. And therefore, if it's anything from buying a car online, then, just doing something like that in the Facebook marketplace is always going to be a slightly higher risk endeavour compared to if you end up going to a reputable garage where you can see if it's accredited to anything, and hopefully it will be in an organisation that if you had a problem you could take it back to if there was a problem. Whereas that there's always going to be a little bit more risk otherwise, depending on the vendors that you use. So I think that the fact that during the lockdown so many places were closed, that it pushed a lot of us online, and I think some of us therefore found that there are certain risks associated with some of the vendors out there. So always be careful, always do plenty of checking before you make any cash transfers, most importantly of all.
Yeah, definitely. So moving on to our last two stories now. So this one is from the ICO. So the ICO have actually published some new guidance on AI and data protection. So this guidance aims to help organisations mitigate the risks, specifically arriving from a data protection perspective, explaining how protection principles apply to AI projects without losing the sight of the benefits that the projects can deliver.
Indeed, incredibly important that the ICO has issued this guidance. The UK is a leader in the field of AI and machine learning in particular, but it's important to remember that where you are using data sets that involve personal data, then things like GDPR and e-privacy will still apply. But it's a matter of making sure you can still do that in a safe, secure manner without it being a inhibitor on development and process. So the key thing is to say you can still go ahead and develop and use AI. It's just a matter of making sure that when it's coming to personal data, in the same way that you would with any confidential or commercial data, that it is kept in a safe and secure manner in order to be able to demonstrate compliance to any regulators.
Yeah, definitely. I think this guidance like this is a lot overdue as well. So it's good to see that people are actually listening to people's needs at the moment.
That's a very good point. I think arguably when you think of the development of AI in recent years, it's important to make sure that this sort of guidance is out there and updated, but arguably I think in this instance the ICO could have been producing something sooner as well. So it's sort of not a moment too soon in effect.
Yeah, definitely. And the last story is from the NCSC. So they have announced their new CEO. So their new CEO is called Linda Cameron, and she is from a foreign affairs background and has a lot of senior knowledge and is highly experienced in the cybersecurity field. Yes,
this is a really important appointment. The previous CEO of the National Cybersecurity Centre had been the person that set it up from scratch when the creation of the NCSC was announced by George Osborne in the budget, and I think it was 2015. So from a standing start, the NCSC has developed a good profile. They've done a lot of outreach. They've been reaching out to different sectors, delivering guidance, support, fantastic free online resources and training. So it's definitely worth taking a look at ncsc.gov.uk if you've not taken a look before. But now the person to sort of pick up the reins and take it on is a very highly experienced practitioner who's worked with the Foreign Office overseas and is very highly experienced with regards to some of the security risks that are out there that could be a risk to the UK in terms of its both its communication networks and its critical national infrastructure. So this is a very important appointment now to continue the very important work of the NCSC in providing a environment, hopefully, where the UK economy can grow digitally online and an environment where it is safe. But as anyone who's been listening to our news updates so far will know, it's always a challenge to try and keep it safe, and at least the NCSC is there trying to do what it can.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So that's all our stories for today. So we just wanted to remind everyone the special offer that we have currently on for our listeners. So we have a GDPR compliance manual for legal services on offer for £99. This is down from £195. So this is around 50% discount. So this is specifically for legal services. However, a lot of our clients in other sectors or contacts, such as the financial services, have actually found this useful as well. So do you want to explain a little bit more about the manual, Peter?
Yes, it contains things like practical forms, templates and checklists to allow you to take a look at data protection compliance and makes what can be a rather overwhelming task in terms of bringing an organisation up to GDPR compliance. It breaks it down into manageable, achievable tasks and makes it explainable. The key thing is it does have those forms, templates and checklists in it, because that it's something that a compliance officer can work through, and then it gives you the tools to demonstrate that compliance to a regulator, be it a professional regulator or a regulator like the Information Commissioner's Office. So I think in order to be able to get the discount there, I think it's a matter of sending an email through, I think the email address, Laura, is it the events at Anson Evaluate?
Yeah, so it's events@ansonevaluate.com, or you can just email us directly on admin@digitallawuk.com. And if you just quote that you've come over from our podcast or our webinar or something, we will be able to apply that discount as well. And like it says on the page, it's also available in hard copy and digital copy, and it's just an extra £5 if you wanted a hard copy to cover postage and packaging.
Excellent, and we should probably also mention the webinar we're doing on the 12th of August.
Yeah.
Is that? I think it's at 12 or 1 p.m. on the 12th of August. 1 p.m. And this is on the EU-US Privacy Shield and the decision of the Court of Justice of the European Union to strike down the EU-US Privacy Shield. That is the mechanism that allowed the sharing of personal data of EU citizens in the United States. And of course, the US is where the majority of the world's cloud storage is based. So we are doing a webinar hosted by Anson Evaluate, chaired by Dr. Heather Anson. I'll be one of the panelists, along with Anna Drozd from the Law Society of England and Wales, based in their Brussels office, who is a specialist and has been following this issue with regards to data protection and international data transfers for a number of years, and also Jennifer Baker, who is a tech journalist who has also been following this story for a number of years. So we'll be discussing the background to the decision, the implications for it, and the future of international data transfers with regards to standard contractual clauses and binding corporate rules. So that's another free webinar, and you can register for that in a similar way to how you've registered for this. So the information for that, I believe, is on our website.
Yeah. So yeah, the information will be going up on our website and on social media. However, if you can't find it, just drop us an email and we'll be able to send you the registration link over as well.
Excellent. Good stuff.
Yeah, so that's everything for today. Thank you once again for listening. Just to make you aware, this is also available on a podcast, so on Spotify, Apple, or any other podcast channels that you listen to. So yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you very much.